Welcome to Love the Way You Live with Charlie Lewis, where we connect you to people who share the secrets of living a purposeful and fulfilling life. Bringing you all things art and culture, style, fashion, food, media, and entertainment. And today we have Louis Long joining us. Welcome, Louis. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad you could be with us. As you guys know, y'all know that Louis and I are HU brothers. And we've been doing work together for many years, and I just love your success and everything that you've been doing. And now bringing us the Long Gallery here in Harlem, that we're so happy that you've opened. You've been a beacon of light to the community and just showcasing emerging artists. So you are definitely what I think Harlem needed. And just really want to talk about your background and how you came about owning a gallery after 25 years in marketing and being a chief of staff for Howard University. And you know, you've done a lot. So how did we get to where we are today?
Wow. Well, you know, I think the first thing is that when I set out my career coming out of Howard, you know, we both were in the business school. We both had, you know, aspirations, and we were always, on one hand, you know, kind of trained to work for companies.
Right.
But on the other hand, we had a very strong sense of entrepreneurship and empowerment. And so, in spite of having the opportunity to work for big companies, even as a student and interns, having internships, and even knowing that I would go to business school early on because I applied when I was a senior at Howard, in my mind, I always knew I'd be an entrepreneur.
Right. Okay.
And that would be whether it be inside a company or ultimately outside a company. And I also felt and knew at that time that I could only ever kind of measure my success based on what I myself created.
Okay.
And so over the years, I had toyed with a number of different ventures. So I would say I'm probably just a serial entrepreneur of sorts. And I would say that also could conform to corporate culture and achieve and be an entrepreneur and create things inside companies. And so throughout my corporate career, I always was in the area where I was launching new businesses, launching new products, launching new services. And so that was the fuel for my entrepreneurial interest, but always looking for kind of the right thing. And so I tried an online business at one point, tried other services, and then I started collecting art when I had an opportunity to go to South Africa. And as with many people, when they buy a new home, they have clean white walls. You know, in my mind, I didn't want any print art or posters. I wanted all original art. So I went to South Africa and I bought everything I could find. I bought batiks, I bought works on paper, I bought canvases that were unstretched that were rolled up. And I came back needing a suitcase that I could pack all these items in that were partially for me and as gifts.
Okay. All right. Now, when you think of your career, or when you think of entrepreneurship, did you grow up in a family business?
Actually, I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, both of my parents worked in the government, or worked for the government of sorts. My mom was a teacher, and my dad worked for as a pharmacist in the city government.
Okay. All right. Did you, when you went to Howard and throughout all your career, did you ever think that you would always be in corporate America, or did you think that there would be an opportunity for you to create this, you know, one day create a gallery?
I would say that a gallery wasn't necessarily, you know, in my view. Many people always ask, did you always want to have a gallery? No. What was always in my view was ownership. And, you know, and that was, you know, that was a part of my DNA by virtue of my grandfathers. I'm named for both of my grandfathers. One of my grandfathers was a chef, a cook. He cooked for the legislature in Florida back in the early 1900s. And later, when he moved out of Florida into Georgia, he became kind of the barbecue king. Okay, and there's a restaurant to this day that actually still makes his recipe.
Wow, wow,
And
wow.
it's interesting. I had a cousin that was driving through that town and tasted the barbecue at this particular restaurant, and they thought, "Wow, that's my Uncle Lewis's tastes like his recipe."
Right.
And come to find out, one of the older guys in the business was in the kitchen.
Wow.
Who had worked for my grandfather. And so, as a young boy. And so then my other grandfather, he was a farmer.
Okay.
He owned property, and he was the kind of the gentleman in town, small southern town, North Carolina, that was, he had a shop in the fields where people could go and buy extra feed if they needed to, and other kind of household good items. And he also just ran his farm, and he was not a sharecropper. He owned his property.
Wow.
So,
Wow. So when you thought about opening the gallery, which has been, 6 years now since you've been open, how did it all come about?
well, first and foremost, I mean, because it's related to the last question. And so, when I've considered all kinds of businesses, big ventures, startups that might require venture funding, and so. But when I thought about a retail business, which this is ultimately is, I always thought that I would never want to invest in, start in a retail business for a property that I did not own.
Okay.
Because I've seen too many times where businesses go create equity, create a customer base, and then they are shut out because they decide to raise the rent or they don't control the property.
Right, exactly.
And so I said I would never be in that scenario. I would. I mean, for a retail business, your location is really a part of your business and your brand. And so when I had the opportunity to have a property that had a commercial space, that opened the doors to a lot of different ideas for what the space could be.
Okay.
And having had a kind of a longing to experience and understand Harlem since I can remember as a teen, reading Langston Hughes and James Baldwin and the writers of Harlem Renaissance. In my mind's eye, I always had a romanticism with Harlem.
Okay.
And so when I finally moved to New York and I had a chance, or moved back to New York, and had a chance to, see Harlem making changes and shifts, I wanted to be a part of it.
Okay.
And so, and then although I wasn't able to at the time, I lived in another part of the city, I would always come to Harlem. But when I came to Harlem, I always felt that it somehow fell short of that image in my mind's eye of this cultural kind of hotbed.
Right.
And while there are great institutions here, don't get me wrong, I mean, they're amazing.
Yeah.
But on a casual, any given day, to be able to walk in and connect with the culture, I felt that those opportunities were lacking or weren't there. And so when I had a space and an artist came by and nudged me and asked if they could have an exhibition in my space, I was like, okay.
Right.
So that's how
Because now it's the Long Gallery, but before it was the Soul Studio.
it was.
So how did that name come about, and then why was the transition over from the Soul Studio to the Long Gallery?
So, as I said before about having a retail space, I felt that at the time I didn't know how the space would be programmed or used, but I felt it was an incredible playground.
Right.
And so at one moment I thought that it could be some type of a fashion play. And then I kind of really just started to watch the street traffic after kind of being here. And I realized that something that was more cultural, but at the same time that had a service component. And so actually the Soul Studio, as it was originally intended, was not intended to be a gallery, it was intended to be a photo studio.
Okay.
In the vein of like a James Van Der Zee.
Okay.
And as I was, and the universe has a strange way of converging, but as I was talking to one of my cousins about the idea for the space, and I told her the concept, the soul meaning light, but a play on sun. But also the essence of who we are, I thought that it would be a great name for a photo studio.
Okay.
And so was discussing it with my cousin, and she said, you know what, I have a gift I want to give you. And with the idea being centered on James Van Der Zee, it turns out she was giving me an original Van Der Zee of her father, which was my uncle.
Okay. Wow.
And so, which was taken in Harlem in the 1940s. So although I grew up in the Mid-Atlantic area, I didn't realize that I had such deep roots in Harlem, which was my great uncle. And to add just to lather it on even thicker, the space that the picture was taken by virtue of the address on the back of the folder that contained the picture from the 1940s was an address within the block in which I'm situated now.
Wow, wow, wow. Amazing story, amazing story. So now that as the Lone Gallery owner, what do you showcase? Who are your works? Are you looking at emerging artists, existing artists? What's your lay of the land?
Sure, so, New York has thousands of art galleries. Mm-hmm. And so one of the questions I always get is, do you only show Black artists? Right. The answer is no. Mm-hmm. I mean, however, I'm a Black guy. Mm-hmm. And so it would be really just completely out of whack if I did not have some bias or leaning towards that. Mm-hmm. But that notwithstanding, the basic premise is to show artists from underrepresented groups that may not have another venue to actually show their work in a white box in New York City. Okay. And so I like to pride myself on saying that I try to give some artists of promise their first exhibition in New York City. Mm-hmm.
What did you feel like after that first opening and that first exhibition, excuse me? What was your feeling? How did you feel about that?
I felt great, but at that time, I was still a corporate person, and I was commuting between here and South Florida. Okay. And so I flew in literally for the opening. I gave the keys to the artist and said, do what you want to do. And so it was in my space, but I wasn't kind of connected to it until towards the end of the night, I was standing at the door and someone asked me if I was the gallerist. And at that point, a light went on, and I said, I never even considered that word before. Right. To myself, and I just said, naturally, yes.
Okay.
So there you go.
And there you go. And that's how you have it. What are some of the challenges you face by being a gallerist and looking at artists and just the day struggle? You owning the space is a great thing because, like you said, you don't have to worry about the rent aspect of it. But what do you face? What's some of the challenges you face?
Yeah, and so there are myriad challenges. The first I would say is the content, right? And that would be the artist and the work. And so there are many artists, and I'm probably deluged with interest by artists who are yearning for a place to show their works. And so one of the challenges, I just can't accommodate all the people that really need and want and desire a place to show their work. Right. On the other hand, all things aren't created equal. Right. And so there was an article in Bloomberg this week which talked about there being a gold rush now on Black art by Black artists. And so while the world isn't fair, there are some artists that are going to get much more sway than others. Right. And so for me, attracting the artists that are going to get the sway and drawing a balance between providing opportunities that ones that are going to definitely shoot off and be well, and then others that might be teetering. And so the ones that are the givens, there's fierce competition for them. And so really being able to provide a value proposition to the artist, which helps them have some confidence to take a risk on a brother in Harlem who, was in corporate for so many years and really is self-taught in this space. Right.
Do you find yourself, okay, so for artists like the Derek Adams, the Micheline Thomases and stuff like that, are they acceptable? I mean, is that something that are those people that you go after, or would they even want to have a conversation with you about showcasing in your gallery? Or how do they feel about showcasing in Harlem versus showcasing in downtown Chelsea, Soho, and stuff of that nature?
I think they're definitely open to being showcased anywhere, and they have all been very supportive of the gallery. And they've been to the gallery, and they've sent people to the gallery or artists to the gallery. But they also have relationships with galleries where they're already represented. Okay. And so an artist that is already represented, then that would not be an option. Okay. Necessarily. And
how does that work for an artist in representation? Is it something that they go and seek? to be in a #1 gallery? How does that work?
Many seek, but few are chosen.
Okay.
Okay, so a number of artists, most artists would love to be represented by a top, a venerable kind of established gallery.
Okay.
But again, there's just not that many spots.
Okay.
And so on one hand, yes, but on the other hand, there are many artists that are interested in just being presented. Mm-hmm. And so given my trajectory in the space and my being self-taught, I never, and one other thing I will say is that representing an artist to me is the highest responsibility in order. And so I haven't taken that responsibility yet because I felt like I was learning the space. And so I present artists, but I don't represent the artists.
Okay. And the representation is when you actually go and you do the marketing and the media and everything for them?
Well, you do a bit of both of that in presenting an artist, but representing is that you're almost as if you're their manager with a long-term agreement that you are going to help build their career.
Okay.
And so in many cases, those relationships can take many different forms, but they can include everything from paying for all their materials to providing them a studio space to
so it's almost like a live-in residency type thing?
No. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't define it as any one thing. What I'd say it's a level of investment in the thing that the artist may need most.
Okay.
So some artists may need you to help them secure materials because they work in some form. Some artists may need some huge warehouse to make their works because it's a certain thing.
Right.
And so it just depends on kind of what that artist might need, which would define kind of the extra commitment that the gallery is going to make or investment they're going to make in that artist.
Okay. And how do you go about choosing artists that you present?
So, that has evolved, and that kind of reflects my evolution in this business. And so I initially was purely operating on the aesthetic.
Okay.
And so I felt that I had a good eye of sorts, and I trust my own judgment aesthetically. And so I would make a call. And then as I learned more, I understood that great work is not necessarily the work that I want to treat this gingerly. What I will say is that as I understood more about the business, I realized that some work I'll say it a different way. I've had people come to me with work that they've purchased en masse from one artist over years and wanted me to help make a secondary market for them. Okay. And there just wasn't a lot of value for it. Right. I'll put it that way. Okay. And then there are other artists that have works and they trade and they are in the secondary market, in the auction. And so ultimately that becomes a delineation of value. Okay. And so being a person trained in finance and business and value creation, I started to see this differently in not just being receptive to and excited about the aesthetic value, but also trying to make projections about the actual intrinsic value and financial value. Okay. And so trying to figure out how to make those meet. Okay. And in some cases, that is completely intangible, but there's some real intangibles too. Okay. Such as, is there an attraction of that work by esteemed collectors and institutions? What kind of training does that artist have? Okay. And they become some things that are almost filters of sorts, which I would say admit that it's not fair. Okay. But it's just kind of how the business works. Okay. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll be back with part 2 with Louis Long, and we'll talk about some of the nuances of being a gallerist and what it takes to be successful. Thanks.